Now we should be able to do the tip shot, tip environment shot, so holding parts of the environment. Now we see we're in a virtual environment called training and model. It's how we make our environments together. I think we just did there's something to install. We will install into this it's how's everyone doing online?
So I'm not seeing that specific wheel file that was named in the Word document that's on that GitHub repository.
It's not GitHub, it's in GDAL courses, software download.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that URL that was specified takes you to GitHub. Okay.
Yeah, that link's no longer accessible. He left the university.
Oh, okay.
But that is where I got it from. I also have it in the software folder. Right here, or software download.
Great. Thank you. I found it.
So then you should be able to do pip environment install the wheel file when you're in the virtual environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Sweet. Is everyone else online doing all right? Tick silence is okay. So now we have VS Code installed, and now we have Python installed. Now we're going to want to so now we're going to want to do Control-Shift-P. Control-Shift-P brings up command prompt in VS Code that allows us to do certain things. So I want to select a Python interpreter because now I have multiple versions of Python. I want VS Code to now recognize my virtual environment. So that's what I'm doing here is I'm telling VS Code which version of Python I want to use. So I can do Python select interpreter. So you can just type select interpreter. And these are a list of all the Python interpreters I have. I have multiple interpreters. I have multiple versions of Python. And now I want to choose the one I created. Where do I see it? It should be. It should be, this is the one I created just now. So, and then I can close the shell. So I'm going to delete this, and then I'm going to open a new terminal. And then I'm going to do Python hang on, I'm not. Python interpreter.
Coming down 11:30 or something.
And now I should be able to run
I can't do it. I'm so.
from
He's like, I can't do it.
OSGeo in import GDAL. Sweet. So I have a virtual environment and now I'm being able to import GDAL. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new module. So I'm going to go to File, New Text File. And we're going to start writing code. So, so what we're going to, who can explain to me what a group by operation is? Yeah, so we could do by count or max or min, aggregation or combining. So we're going to open our crime data in QGIS. So know your data, know your data, know your data. And the better you know your data, the easier things are to fix and look at. So to open a new file in VS Code, you can just do new text file, and then that'll open a new file. We haven't saved it, but we've opened a new file. We can save, if you go to File, Save As, and I want to save it to my GDAL in class, and I want to call it, it's a Python file. I don't know, it's a Python place. So this is gonna be GDAL group by .py. So I'm going to paste in from OSGeo import GDAL. And from OSGeo import OGR. OGR allows you to do conversion, file conversion essentially. Oh, and a lot of other things actually. So now we're going to start writing code to do a group by operation. Let's start by looking at the crime data. So the crime data is in the geospatial folder. GDAL course, and then crime, and then there's the shapefile. Here's the shapefile. So let's drag this over. We see that there's data in 00, so this is, some of this data could be cleaned up, but I don't care about that right now. This should all be in Colorado, but it's not. This is just part of having data integrity issues, which we deal with all the time. I'm not going to go through how to clean this up. Just recognize, know your data, know your data, know your data. If you said this data was all in Denver, you would be wrong. So that's where you have to be careful about knowing your data. So now I opened the attribute table. This table is 331,000 records, so that's not a small table. The one I wanted to look at now was offense type. So this is reported crime in Denver. And so if we scroll through, we're going to see mischief and other. And one thing I wanted to know is a group by operation. So I want to know for each crime type, list the number of occurrences that happened. I just wanted to get a better sense of that. That would be what's known as a group by operation, or we're summarizing the information. A lot of times group by is also synonymous with aggregate. So you can aggregate data using count, min, max. There's other aggregate functions, but essentially we want to do a group by to look at the counts of type. Esri calls it summary statistics. They butchered it. They actually should have called it a group by, because that's what summary statistics is really doing. It's grouping data. But Esri doesn't strictly follow database terminology, which makes it confusing, because if you do have a database background, you'll say, what is summary statistics? And that's not what it is. It's a group by operation. So I think sometimes where Esri fails is they tried to create their own terminology when there was terminology already existing, and that makes it more confusing. So in QGIS, you can use the group stats plugin. So if you go to manage and install plugins, we can install group stat. I already have it installed. So if I do group stats, you can install group stats. And now if you click group stats, check. There's my group stat. I want to offense type. So I want to get offense type by row, and then column. And then there's a way to do count. So rows is going to be offense type, value is going to be offense type, and then count. So I want the number of occurrences. So if I hit calculate, we can see that offense type, so there's 72 count of 72 occurrences or frequency, accessory conspiracy to crime in this data. And if we add up all of these numbers, we'll get 300,011, which would total the maximum. So this is a way to do a group by operation and get those results. I think you can export from here, copy to clip, save to CSV. So you can save this to a text file or a CSV file. So this group stats allows you to do group by. Well, let's say we don't want to use QGIS. Let's say we wanted to do this in Python. We can also do that. So let's start writing code. So in order to do that, okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I only need to import OGR. OGR allows us to do data conversion I don't actually want to do any GIS analysis. I just want to look at the data. So that's why I'm using OGR, not GDAL. So I'm going to define a variable called shapefile, crime shape, equal to, and this is, who can tell me what R stands for in Python within a string? It's a raw string. So the reason I'm using a raw string is because I want to put paste in a path, and I don't want the backslashes to be escaped. I want the backslashes to be read, otherwise I won't have a valid path. So that's why I'm using the R before the string. So I can go to crime, and then I'm going to right click shift copy as path, and then do Control V. So this copied me a path to this file, which is great. Now, I also encourage anything I'm writing here would be good to type out. So we do comments using the # in Python. So we can now create a comment in Python. You should always comment your code as you go. It's a lot faster to comment code as you go than after the fact. The other thing that commented code does, usually you can write the comments before you write the code. And this allows you to have pseudocode, which then you can turn into comments, which then gives you a way to check that your logic does what you say it should do, which is why comments can be very useful when you're starting to code, and because it explains what you're doing and why. So we're going to set up the shapefile driver. Set up the shapefile driver. So driver, I'm going to call it driver. It's going to be OGR dot get driver by name. So OGR get driver by name. I'm going to open parens, and I'm going to do Python is case sensitive, so be careful with that. ESRI shapefile. So what I'm telling OGR to do is I want to use the Esri shapefile driver, which there's code that OGR has to be able to read a shapefile. There's also Esri file geodatabase, and I think OGR might have a CSV file. They also have raster drivers. So there's different drivers for different file formats. So now we can hit enter. I did not. Well, okay, so now I want to check if the shapefile is found. So usually you want to make sure that the file is found. I specified that this is the path, but maybe it doesn't exist on the file. So let's test it. So we're going to do if data source. Sorry, my apologies. We got ahead of ourselves. So we're going to now we're going to open the shapefile. So 0 means read only. 1 means writable. Okay. Data source equals driver dot open. So I'm going to open the shapefile. And I want it to be readable only. I do not want to be able to edit this shapefile currently. So that's why it's 0. I'm going to open the shapefile. I'm going to read data from it, and then I'm going to close it. Does that make sense? So now if data source. So if data source is none. We're gonna print could not open, and I'm gonna pass in a variable into a string using the dot format method. So I have a dot format method, which allows me to pass in a string into a, sorry, it allows me to pass in a variable into a string at runtime. And I'm gonna pass in the crime shape. So I'm passing in a tuple of one variable into format. And then when I run this and the data source is, if the data source is none, it's going to print could not open, and then whatever this is set to. So for instance, if I did this and saved it, so let's save the file. And now I can go to run and run without debugging. And we should see that could not open crim. Does that make sense? So now let's go back, dot shp. So this is just a sanity check to make sure that we can open the file. And then we're gonna have an else file, else. So now I'm testing if, so now I can open the file. Let's print. In order to run, you can do run without debugging, which that's why we installed the Python extension. Now we're gonna use the virtual environment that we set up, and we're going to run this code using the virtual environment we have defined. So now we can do opened. And then we'll pass in dot format. And then we can do prime shape. And then there should be a final closing bracket. Why is that? Is there only one there? Right. And then there's another one there. Sorry. So I missed a bracket. That's why it was complaining. This is why VS Code is helpful, because if I did this, I'm going to get an error saying that there's mismatch of, see, it's red. It means that I don't have correct closing brackets. That's why VS Code is helpful. So now we're going to, so right now we've opened the shapefile if it exists. And now I want to get the layer. This is a shape file, so there is only one layer. Okay, so layer equals data source dot get layer. Other formats, other file formats can have multiple layers. A KML can have multiple layers. We will cover looping through a KML shortly. But for this example, a shapefile can only have one layer. So that's why I'm not iterating through all the layers. Otherwise, it would have to iterate through all the layers within the file. So layer def equals layer dot get layer definition. Actually, do I need that? Actually, sorry, I don't think sorry, my apologies. We don't need layer def right now. So now what we're going to do is loop over the offense types and add each new offense to a list. So need to loop over the offense types and add each new offense type to the list. Do I have a list defined? I do not. So now we're going to define a list. So we need to create a list. So off type equals an empty list. Does that make sense so far? Okay. Now, how do we loop over data? How do I write a for loop? Okay, for people that don't know, you typically do for I in list. So I'm going to do for feature, which is a variable name, for feature in layer, and layer is the layer that we defined here. And then colon. Now a for loop is blocks are differentiated based on indentation in Python. So that's why when I do the colon, I enter, I automatically am brought into this indentation. So this is saying that for everything inside the indentation, do this for the loop. So now I'm going to get the offense from the layer, which would be feature dot get field, and then off the. So we remember this is where it's important to know your data, know your data, know your data. So we know that the offense type is what I want. So that's where you have to know the field names and why it's important to know your data, because you can run into issues where you think this field name is offense type, but it's really offense type 2. And if you typed offense type 2, the field wouldn't be found. I think that would throw an error because the field wouldn't exist. So this is why it's important to know our data. So for each feature, I want GDAL to get this value and return it to me. Does that make sense? So as I'm reading through the shapefile, for each feature, I want that value, offense type value. So if offense, so now I want to add the offense type to this list if it's not already added to the list. So I want a list of all the unique offense types. Does that make sense? Okay. Who can tell me why I'm doing that? Sorry, say that again. Yeah, but I meant why am I even getting a list, creating a, why am I going through the, why am I creating a list of unique offense types? Does anyone else have any other ideas? What? Yeah, so I want to get all unique values so that I can iterate through them and then get some account for each offense type. So now we're going to do if offense not in off type. Wow, not offense. If offense not in off type. So what I'm testing is if this value is not in this list, I'm going to want to append to it. So off type dot append and then offense. So now off type dot append offense. Are we good so far? So now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to do layer dot reset reading. This is going to allow me to loop through the layer again, because now I've looped through the layer and gotten all the unique offense types. Now I need to loop through it again. And for each offense type, I want to count the number of rows that match that offense type. Does that make sense? Okay. And if I'm writing this, you might want to write what I'm writing. It's really good to learn. I give you the source code, but just reading code is not very helpful. Making your own mistakes and learning how to write code is more useful. Okay, so now we've so now we need to loop over the off type list. For I in off type, so I'm going to loop through each value in the list, and I'm going to define a counter equals 0. And then now that I've looped through each, offense type, what do I need to do? Can somebody tell me what I need to do now? Do I have to loop through the data? I have to look through the data, right? And then count the number of occurrences for each offense type, right? So, for each offense we need to loop through all the features. So how can we loop through the features? Well, I've already done it once, right? So how do I do it? Yep. So now I'm going to loop through every row in the feature, and I need off offense type. Offense equals feature dot get field, and it's going to be off so I'm going to get the offense. And then I'm going to do if offense equals I. What is this testing for? The value for each row in the feature. But yes, you're correct. And then I'm going to want to I'm gonna want to increment the counter. If that's the case. So I can do plus equal 1, which is a shorthand for I equals I plus 1. So this is shorthand for that. And then I can do, so for each offense type, I want to print I and then the counter. And then I can do layer dot reset so let's start debugging this and seeing if I have any errors. I don't know. I might. This code does take a little while to run because it's looping through each offense type and then every feature. I think there's 100+ offenses, so it's going to loop through the first offense type and then 300 rows, and then it's going to go to the next offense type and then loop through every row again, counting. So that's why this takes a little bit of time. The GDAL, the OGR, why did that not do what I thought it should? That is not what it should be doing. I have an error in here. I'm an idiot. Who sees my error? What? What do you mean resets the waiting? No, that's fine. I want to reset it for each offense type. I want to reset it. Yes. So the last print completed should be here after all offense types have been calculated. Then I want to say code completed, which is it is an error in logic, but it's not a syntactical error that the code would break. But logically, what I had isn't really correct because the code's not complete. That's where indentation matters. So now I can start this again and we'll see that this should work. And it won't print code complete until all the offenses have been generated or calculated. That would be a better way to say it. Has everyone written this? Does everyone have working code? And if you don't, let's take this time and we can walk around and get working code, because I think having this written for everyone is useful. You will learn a lot by having to write code like this. I know I did. I had to write it a few weekends ago. Does everyone have it working? Does anyone have it working? All right, then if no one has it working, let's, I can walk around and help people get it working. Or get GDAL installed for them, then you still have.
the files in, somewhere that's in. So go back to. No, like. Okay, now pull up. See. We need to navigate to the GDAL and class folder. See, let's use the files. And then, yeah, and then no, GDAL and class. That's the documents. Should be GDAL and class. Right. Then install the environment. Okay, then do the environment. Yeah. And then you want to, yeah, try that. So it is. Sweet. I did have to add over the system path. The snippet. I took a screen capture of it. So what I did was I just added the system, added that to the system map. So now we should be able to pick an environment shell. Yep. Now we should be able to type Python. Now we should be able to do from OSPO. Import G. Do control C. Do which Python? Yeah. Oh, wait, we didn't install the web file. Pip environment install. Sorry. It's in the professions. That's why it's real helpful to have 2 monitors. For anyone that doesn't have 2 monitors, go ask your boss for 2 monitors. You're 30% more productive. So if they can't spend $300 on a second monitor, probably have to have a conversation. Is it pound? Pound wise, penny foolish? Yeah. Or it's pound foolish. Yeah, it's pound wise, penny foolish. Yeah. That's the second monitor. Sweet. Now do again. Now do from OS POs the port as well. No. We didn't install it. Okay, and then we install. Okay. And then now we Now it's installed. That we do by that. And then from OSGO import to them. Well, having everybody say, but I'll even everybody. There we go. Got it. I deleted the virtual environment and recreated it. All right, thank you. Does anyone have it working? Go to the next one, and we'll do that. You have everything installed, right? Start with the lab. Install it, actually, What? Nice. Now we're gonna do the same thing next. So now we're gonna follow this up with how to do this in Ezra.
And then we'll take lunch.
Yeah.
What do you mean? They're closing. They just closed the front door. We can stay inside. They don't kick us out. We got the big boss man. What? I don't know what live share features is. You have access with what? The real file?
Yeah, I get, the right version of Python, so not supported on the platform.
Okay, so you're in the virtual environment. Okay. Version of Python, the 32-bit. I'm a little better than lunch, and then we're gonna do as we want, and then we're gonna do lunch. So.
Okay, so how do you do this in Esri? Let me rephrase that question. How do you do a group by operation in Esri? And Jeannie, I can use your license, right? Please and thank you. It's better to beg for forgiveness and ask permission. Okay, so how do you do this in Art Pro without code? Yeah, and do summary statistics. Yeah, well, I think there's actually two ways to do it. At least in Arc Pro, in Arc Map, there was only one way to do it, but then they created a an ArcPy tool. There wasn't always an ArcPy tool previously. So forgive me, I don't use Esri very often, so bear with me. I'm probably the only one in this room that doesn't use Esri. But I will muddle my way through Esri. So we'll go to map, add data. We're going to add the crime data. So I'm going to load the crime data into here. I'm going to look at the know your data, know the data. So we're going to look at the attribute table. And offense type looks great. So if you wanted to do this, you could do summarize. So you can right click the attribute table and then input, output crime. Is this offense type? And I want to do count. And then if I hit OK, this should give me a count. The other way you can do that. So I'm going to let this finish. That looks perfect to me. Summary. So there should be summary statistics, this one. That's the geospatial tool to do the summary statistics. So you can get to it either by going to geoprocessing tools, summary statistics, or by right clicking summarize. So there's at least two ways to do this in Arc Pro. In Arc Map, there's only one because the summary statistics wasn't a geoprocessing tool, or I don't think it was. They made it a geoprocessing tool more recently. So that's how to do it manually. Now let's do it with code. So we're going to open a new file and we're going to do save as GDAL in class, and this is going to be called ESRI group by .py. So now we're going to need to switch virtual environments. The reason being because ArcPy is not installed on this Python virtual environment, right? So now I can do Control Shift P again, Python select interpreter. And then instead of using my virtual environment, now I want to use the ArcGIS Pro through PY3. So if I select this, now I should have a new Python virtual environment defined, which would allow me to use ArcPy. So the first thing I'm going to do is import ArcPy. Who can tell me in Esri, how do you loop through data? Does anyone? Yeah, so it'd be a search cursor. Esri has three different cursors, a search cursor, update cursor, and insert cursor. A search cursor is read only, so you can use it to read through features. Update cursor allows you to update values in a feature. And then a insert cursor allows you to insert new features into a shapefile or file geodatabase. So we're gonna do import ArcPy. We're gonna define the same crime data. So I'm gonna right shift click copy as path. Control V. And then we're gonna do fields is I need to define fields. So there are some slight differences. And it's gonna be a fence type. Okay, and then off type. So I've defined empty list. So now we need to loop through the features and add the fence types to the list. Does that make sense? So same thing we did. So we're gonna use a cursor. With allows us to open a file. So with ArcPy .da, DA is the faster version of the cursor. So with ArcPy.da search cursor, and we're going to pass in crime shape, and then we're going to pass in the fields as cursor. For row in cursor. What? Oh, I must have run it by accident. Disregard that error. There isn't really an error here. If row not in off type. Off type dot append row 0. So what's that going to get me? It's going to give you a list of all offense types, all unique offense types. So now we need to loop through So with arcpy.da.search cursor line shape fields as cursor for I in off So now I'm going to iterate over the offenses. And then I'm going to define a counter. And then for row in cursor. For row in cursor. If row dot zero. So it's saying, give me the row, and then I want the zero element out of that tuple. Cursor returns a tuple for every feature. And based off the fields that you define in the fields in the cursor. So it's going to be a tuple of information. In this case, because I've only defined one field, it's going to be a tuple of one value, which would be the offense type. So in order to pull out the offense type, it would be row index position 0, which is how I'm getting the field value. So row dot 0 would give you offense type for that feature. Does that make sense? You have no idea how long I spent on this bug. I have an error in my logic. Might I suggest we run the code first, and then we'll be able to figure out the error. Esri DA cursors are a lot faster than the GDAL. So that's why this group by is still probably running. Yeah, this cursor in GDAL is still running. The DA cursor has been heavily optimized, which is why when we go to this, the Esri cursor is already finished and the GDAL is still going on. So keep that in mind. The Esri cursor has been heavily optimized for fast code. GDAL has not been. I'm not sure if there's any. I've actually asked a couple people. I don't think there's a more efficient way to write this in GDAL. I don't know if there is. I don't know how to do it. Having said that, why is everything 0 here? So if I scroll up, this is in Esri, I see criminal mischief other is 14,114, and then everyone is 0. And this was a bug I was faced with this past weekend because I was writing this code this past weekend, and it was like 10 p.m. and I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And this is one of those where I was like, I need to take a break because like I looked at the code, I'm like, it's right, it should work, we're good. And then I'm like, well, why isn't it doing the rest of them? And I'm like, so then I pulled up the documentation, which we're going to do right now. And I said, okay. I don't understand why it's not working. Let's look up search cursor. I probably spent 2 hours looking at this defect, looking at this error. And if we scroll down, resets the cursor back to the first row. So remember when I said Esri is very efficiently written? It's only gonna loop through the data once. So I have to add reset to it in order to reset it for all other offense types. The GDAL one, I didn't have to use reset because it's not as efficiently written. So under the hood, there are things about the Esri cursor that make it more optimized. So if I do cursor dot reset, because Lord knows that was easy to find. So we're going to add a comment here because this is not intuitive. Like I said, I probably spent 2 hours looking at this and trying to figure out what was going on with my logic, because I'm like, the logic looks good. Looks correct. I'm like, what am I missing? And then I'm like, and I'm not sure. I would think that if you loop through the cursor this way, it should, I don't know that you should have to call cursor.reset. Like maybe that's a bug or a feature enhancement Esri would want to do is, in this case, I know why you have to, but it's possible that Esri could code this so that you wouldn't have to call cursor.reset after each time through. So you could submit this as an enhancer that you don't have to call reset. It automatically resets by default. But then you trade that, but then the efficiency would go down. So I think that's why they did it. It's stuff like this, though, in coding that's really hard to learn and to know. And I would also argue the way you learn it is by seeing that it's broken and then having to figure out how to unfix it. So that's how I knew that reset had to be applied here. So now if we run this again, yes, I want to start a new instance. See how it's updating the counts now correctly. That's a good example of where you just have to be patient and try to figure out what's going on with the code and why it's what's happening is what's happening. Because the first thing I was thinking about was not that I had to reset it. In fact, I would have thought you wouldn't have had to reset it. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, let's take lunch. There's nothing more important than lunch. Before we break, does anyone have questions? No questions. Thank you to GS Colorado for lunch. Is there a sponsor for that? Okay. Thank you to GS Colorado for feeding us.
So it's 12 right now, do we want to be back like by
On-
1:12 to 1?
Still
I mean,
one.
we're small.
Well, 45 minutes.
So we can start back and we will see where you want to go. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great, thank
And I'll try to figure out how to turn on the lights.
you. Yeah.
Unless, I'll give it a shot.
Awesome.
I think you know how to do.